Take a look at JT's new head den. This is the den where he gets all the head.
And look at the floating head. The boys are back in town.
Our absent father has returned.
Exactly right. To beat
The
my
milk and the cigarettes are back in town.
They're back on the menu. Oh my god. I am thoroughly grill-pilled, boys. I have become grill-pilled. I am now a married man.
Yay.
I'm spending time with a person I love for once.
Wait,
Thanks.
what were these?
What are these 200 episodes?
No, I love you. I love you, boys. I meant in person, more on a regular basis. I'm spending time with, and then I realized, like, I've noticed, like, I'm kind of out of the loop on things. Like, not the most out of the loop, but I'm a little bit out of the loop. I'm like, oh, wow, this is not bad. It kind of slaps to be a chud.
Right. Stupid bliss. Yeah, to be a wife guy, man. Like, it's a definition. Like our show, you have three bros, and then one of them gets a woman, and then he's nowhere to be seen.
He's not the same.
For the first time, we miss an episode. There you go. Which obviously I'm not throwing it.
Exactly right. It's because I got married. Just blame my wife.
Yeah, but just the fact that the first time we miss an episode happens exactly when one of us becomes a wife guy is like poetry, right?
Yeah.
It's literally poetic. It's pretty cool.
Well, congratulations, Hakeem. Everybody say congratulations, Hakeem, in the chat.
Thank you.
We're so proud of you.
Thank
The
you
wedding
so much.
was absolutely brilliant, but tell me, how was the honeymoon?
The honeymoon was
4
fantastic.
weeks or something? Jesus
Yes,
Christ,
nice.
podcasters
Some
have a
weeks.
lot of money, man.
Oh
Right?
yeah, no, I got unpaid. I actually got my pay slip today. I took out unpaid vacation days, and they charge.
They what?
They charge you out of your pay slip, like, because you're missing days that you're supposed to be working, right? So
That's-
those days that they pay out to you, but
Oh
they
my
kind of
God.
cut it off.
That's
from your pay
unpaid
slip.
vacation. Yeah, they cut
Yeah,
it
that's
out
how
of
it works. So I'm getting like a third of what I'm supposed to be getting
Wow.
paid. Yeah. So this was but no, alhamdulillah, we had a great time. We went to a nondescript island where we had a very, very good time. And we also basically it's places
Did you
where
get the
Arabs
list?
went and then we're there no longer. What list? The Epstein list? What?
Yeah, you said island.
It's the island. Of course. Yes, I did. Who was it that said that somebody stole a 16-year-old girl from him? Which one? What was? It was some
Excuse
Epstein
me?
stuff. It was an Epstein list. I told you I'm out of the loop. I don't fucking know what's going on. But two of the people on the list supposedly had a professional falling out because one of them took his 16-year-old from the other one on the
Jesus,
family.
Murphy.
I don't know the fucking details now.
And you were just on an island, and a 16-year-old disappeared from an island?
Exactly.
I don't know.
There you go. No, alhamdulillah, it was a really good time. It was a lot of history, culture mix, and also trying to do some, walking on the beach and all this kind of stuff, fun things. But now we're home and we're moving, and Jesus fuck, like I don't
That's
know
not fun.
how you moved, JT, across states. Like
Yeah.
I
It
don't.
was terrible. It was not fun at all. I don't recommend it.
Today we went and did curtains and shit. Like we got the guy to come and be like, oh, you have to measure and do this, and we have to get a second guy to bring in another set of fucking curtains that sit over the window instead of above. I don't know. This is shit that is outside of my adult grade. Does that make sense? I will have somebody's. I will hold somebody's bleeding, beating heart in my hand, and that will be fine.
But this man, he lives in a blank room with a folding chair and like a poker table and and a TV on the floor. That's it.
And Capri Suns just everywhere.
That literal meme about a bachelor's house.
Yeah.
Well, Hakeem actually
That is
lived
Hakeem.
in it. Like,
Yeah.
it's based off of Hakeem. It's just different pictures of different places he rented throughout his whole life. That's all of the memes.
Oh, yeah, exactly right. The outside of the building with the trash, the trash collection thing, but it's open.
Yeah.
So you see what, oh my god,
Yeah.
that's
I just came back not from a 4-week but a 3-day birthday experience. Your boy is 1 year older. I'm officially an ancient man at this point.
Hey.
I refuse to reveal my age. I'm between the ages of 18 and 55. And for some reason, most of our listeners believe it's closer to 55. But I accept it as a compliment. They see wisdom in me, and that's why they give it to me. But no, it was sick as fuck. I got some decent IRL degenerates. We went out into nature. We rented out these houses. was absolutely absurd. But since we're being wife guys, I got to give a big compliment to my woman, for she gave me a trip to the motherland as a gift to Beijing, actually. So at some point down the line, I will be recording in front of Mao's fucking big head in Tiananmen Square. He's gonna set up in front of it. I'm like, no, I'm one of you. I can record here.
Are you going by yourself?
Please try to do like 2 minutes.
No, with her, of course.
Okay, all right, cool.
Yeah, she's gonna record. She's gonna hold the camera. She's gonna stand with a microphone.
Exiled you.
And that's when we decide to do the China episode. And I'm like shouting out loud with 20 cops around me. So, is China socialist?
A bunch of tiny Chinese cops trying to bring the bear. You go down.
Apparently, I'm supposed to look out for that. I don't know. Chinese listeners tell me. Apparently, when there's big pasty dudes, everybody's like taking photos, which is cute. I always wanted to be a Z-level celebrity, a novelty, yeah. Because wherever you go in Europe, you're not a novelty when you look like me. But now I can experience what I don't know, black people feel like when they come to Eastern Europe when they go there. So it's going to be interesting.
You know something that I had that was very pleasant in my on my honeymoon. I did not have one interaction with a French person. That is a tremendous experience. I don't think I had it. I may have had one interaction with an American, so that kind of soiled it. I'm teasing.
I have to say, it's always comrades over cultures. With all comrades, Hakeem did me such a massive fucking solid favor. So weddings are super freaky to me, but I enjoy them. But weddings without me being semi-intoxicated sound like the third level of limbo. And his wedding was literally 100 out of 100. I would change absolutely nothing. But even in a wedding so beautiful and pristine and lovely, I would have struggled very hard. So he made sure that there's like a side room for the sinners, for the subhumans. But I still appreciate it. There's a side room for the subhumans where we could go and actually get some drinks, which really made my legs and arms move so I could actually dance. Hell, Hakeem even gave me compliments that I can move to an extent.
Dances, mashallah.
Except for when somebody put me, I think it was your wife, in one of the, call it choro, in one of the, where everybody holds each other, then runs in circles. Yeah. I was just glitching, and everybody's staring at me. Who the fuck is this guy? Like, what the? I'm trying. I'm trying. What is going on?
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Deprogram.
Right.
I am now a married man, so I will refrain from any needlessly grotesque jokes.
Wow. Yeah, I don't buy that.
It took like 10 seconds. What I was going to say is thank you, everybody, for all your love and support. I've been away for a while. Khataya JT was sick. Hugo was sick as well, and we kind of just mixed and matched between us. So for the first time in our history, we missed a singular episode, I believe, in the upload. But it's okay. Inshallah, it will not happen again. The only reason that we could be this consistent and this orderly and to deliver the quality that we do as often as we do, I hope, is because of your guys' fantastic support on Patreon. Generally, we cannot do it without you. So thank you to every single one of you who helped. It's what allowed Hugo to come and get shit-faced at my wedding. So thank you very much. I incredibly appreciate it.
Hell yeah, brother.
Yeah. Alhamdulillah. What was I going to say? Today we have a special episode. Hopefully it's the beginning of a series. One which the performative title of it is Status Update. In which we're going to look at various nations or regions of the world and look at the particular state of the class struggle, political movements, prospects of development of socialism, so on and so forth. Some countries require more historical background, so we'll deliver that when we need to. Other countries are just the cutting edge, what's happening on the ground right now. Today's country is Burkina Faso, the land of upright men, and the birthplace of our very own friend of the show, Thomas Sankara. He would have been a fantastic guest had he lived, which is a shame. He was young enough that he would have been able. I'm sure we would have been able to manage something.
That would have been so cool.
Yeah. But God had other plans. Alhamdulillah. We are gonna break this up into 3 little bits. JT will have a more of a quick historical overview and the old class relations and the form of political organization that existed within Burkina Faso. Hugo will deliver a more concise history of the Sankara period and slightly before, slightly after. And I'm going to draw it to Ibrahim Traore and the current movements that have happened. Neo-colonial exploitation of Burkina Faso, the movements of the current Burkinabe government against it, the class relations and political forces on the ground, and what could the future hold. So yeah, JT, do you want to take it away?
You got it, partner. All right. I condensed this as much as I could. It's still going to be a bit of a little trek, so come with me, dear listener, through the beautiful history of.
Always come with you.
You didn't last 2 minutes before you went back to your old ways.
I can't. It's that shirt. It's that white and blue shirt. It does things.
What can I say? My signature move. All right, let's begin. Like every colonized place, Burkina Faso, formerly Upper Volta, has a long and rich history. In pre-colonial times, the region played host to a number of kingdoms and peoples. From the 11th century onwards, the Mosi kingdoms developed powerful centralized structures, controlling trade routes between the Sahara and the forest regions. Despite frequent raids from Songhai, Mali, and later Islamic jihads, they largely retained independence. Over time, Islam spread through trade networks, but many Mosi elites resisted full Islamization until the colonial period, keeping a mix of animist traditions and Islam. But then, as often happens, on a dark and stormy night, baguettes drawn and mustaches twirled, came the French. I'm sure you're... Yeah, I know. This is a story as old as time, the French showing up and ruining things. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Scramble for Africa. This is the period from the 1880s through the 1890s where European powers carved up West Africa in their rapacious quest for colonial expansion. France expanded inland from Senegal, the Ivory Coast, and Niger. At the risk of being reductive of a very complex period, as all history is, French colonial troops gradually subdued Mosi and other groups between 1896 and 1904, often through violent military campaigns. In 1896, the capital of Ouagadougou was occupied and the Moganabo, the Mosi emperor, was forced into a protectorate agreement. Fancy European people drew up arbitrary boundaries, France negotiating with Britain and Germany, eventually fixing Upper Volta's territory between the Gold Coast, Ghana, Dahomey, Benin, Niger, and the Ivory Coast.
I'm very proud of how you pronounce Niger.
Thank you. Look, it's my birthright to say it the wrong way, but you know what? Because I'm so woke, I'll say it like
you
that.
have a small Balkan country where you can always do it if you really feel like it.
Yeah, absolutely, yes.
Oh God! Please don't.
Love how he doesn't know. That shows how not
the enemy of an American geography.
Yeah, I don't understand.
Croatia. Where's the
map?
there?
What does it mean? Anyway, thus began the period of French colonial administration. The playbook was much the same as in just about every other colonial project. The French exploited the locals as a labor reservoir. Hundreds of thousands were sent southward for work, creating long-lasting labor migration patterns. And then you had your very limited schooling, which created only a small French-speaking elite. France maintained their rule largely through traditional chiefs, but they undermined the authority of the Mosi monarchs by co-opting or sidelining them. Same sort of stuff that we always see, destabilize, exploit, and extract. In 1919, France formally established the colony of Upper Volta, mainly to provide labor for plantations and infrastructure projects in Ivory Coast and Ghana. Of course, the locals didn't take this subjugation lying down. Because the French relied heavily on forced labor and taxation, most resistance typically came in the form of practical and mundane stuff. So many communities fled across borders into the Gold Coast, which is British Ghana, or into remote areas to escape taxation and conscription. Workers on roads, railways, or plantations would slow work, they would desert, they would sabotage projects. And then the massive southward migration to the Ivory Coast was both coerced and voluntary. Many Burkinabe preferred working under different colonial authorities rather than staying under harsh French administrators at home. Can't blame them. And that's not to say there was no violent resistance, of course. The Volta-Bani War, which lasted from 1915 to 1916, was the largest armed revolt against French colonialism in the region. Sparked by conscription for World War I and new taxes, multiple ethnic groups took matters into their own hands and engaged militarily with the French occupation. Revolt spread from western Burkina Faso into Mali, and the French responded with brutal repression. They killed tens of thousands of people, they burned villages, intensified their control with ever more draconian measures. But back to Upper Volta itself. Unlike colonies with abundant natural resources, Upper Volta was treated mainly as a labor pool for France's wider African ambitions. The French used compulsory labor, slavery, to build roads, railways, and administration centers. Men were required to spend several weeks or months out of each year on public works projects. Conditions were really harsh. It led to illness, flight, just people trying to get away. Obviously, tons of deaths. But the system was justified as a, quote-unquote, civilizing duty. But essentially, it just provided free labor to the colonial state. France's economic domination of the region was as complete as it was cruel. Something called the head tax forced every adult male to pay cash to the colonial government. But since local subsistence economies were not cash-based, people had to sell labor or migrate to plantations to earn money, creating dependency on the colonial system. Now, taxes were set deliberately at high levels that required wage labor, ensuring a steady flow of cheap workers. Unlike the Ivory Coast or Senegal, Burkina Faso was not made into a major crop export colony because of its climate. That being said, it was used to grow cotton, which is a staple in the global slavery activities playbook. And of course, those picking the cotton didn't actually see any of the benefits because France imposed monopolies on trade. The locals could only sell crops through French companies at low fixed prices, while manufactured goods like textiles and tools had to be bought at inflated prices from French firms. Infrastructure, like roads and railways, were designed not to integrate the local economy, but to extract labor and move resources southwards to ports in the Ivory Coast and Ghana. As is usually the case in colonial projects, no real investment was made in local industry or processing, which left the local population entirely at the mercy of their European occupiers. The icing on the cake was the education system, as is usually the case. France provided almost no education beyond basic literacy skills for a small elite, ensuring that the population stayed dependent on manual labor. Skilled positions were reserved for Europeans or Africans from wealthier colonies like Senegal. This created long-term structural underdevelopment and fueled labor migration patterns. Eventually, the French decided that Upper Volta wasn't worth the effort. Because it was considered economically unviable on its own, Upper Volta was partitioned and divided among the Ivory Coast, French Sudan, Mali, and Niger. Many Burkinabe were conscripted for forced labor in Ivory Coast cocoa plantations. Now, I think now is a good time as any to talk a little bit about the Mogonaba, the Mosi monarchy, and local chiefs. You'll remember that I mentioned earlier that the French ruled indirectly through these chiefs. However, these people sometimes played a dual role. They collaborated with the French to maintain some semblance of power, but some also genuinely tried to shield their populations from the harshest colonial demands whenever possible. For example, Mosi elites lobbied France in the late 1940s to reconstitute Upper Volta as a colony after its 1932 dissolution, because partition had subjected Mosi migrants to even harsher exploitation in Ivory Coast. But, as benevolent as that sounds, the fact of the matter is that many of these chiefs essentially became complicit compradors, right? They enriched themselves through colonial connections. And this is a common trend in colonial projects. The rest of the class structure looked something like this. The peasantry formed the majority class. They were subsistence farmers growing sorghum, millet, and yams. For the peasants, survival meant combining food production with colonial obligations, which was the head taxes, forced cotton cultivation, and labor. These people were the base of society and suffered the brunt of French oppression. Now let's talk proletariat. Since Upper Volta didn't produce many local wage jobs, most proletarians were migrant laborers. This proletariat was exported southwards, working in cocoa or coffee plantations and on railroads and in mines in Ivory Coast, Ghana, and Senegal. This proletariat endured super exploitation, meaning they were paid less than local workers in the south, housed in barracks with poor health and high mortality, and discouraged from settling permanently, instead kept as a rotating pool of cheap labor.
It's like seasonal workers from a century ago on fucking steroids.
Yeah.
Seasonal workers to this day exist, but they have a right or two. Obviously, they have a right or two less than the locals. But when you're taking somebody from one colony that is hyper-exploited to another colony that is hyper-exploited, but like 1% less, but you take the other ones because you're so fucking cheap in the other colony that you want the ones that are hyper-exploited, you get this absolutely fucking unhinged unhinged profit drive that even looks at a colonial subject and says, no, I can get a colonial subject that I can pay even less than the typical colonial subject.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
Cheaper meat machines. Cheaper meat machines. Yeah, these people are. It's dollars and cents. But Upper Volta's proletariat was not deeply urbanized at home, since colonialism outsourced their exploitation to other colonies. And then finally, there was the comprador bourgeoisie. This was a tiny class of colonial intermediaries. You had, pencil pushers educated in the elite French language schools, people who became clerks, interpreters, teachers, and so on, who were all tied to the French administration. Now, some of the aforementioned chiefs also fell into this category. They benefited from colonial rule by acting as brokers between French capital and the local population. But unlike in resource-rich colonies, they remained weak. They were more of like a petty bourgeoisie than a strong comprador class. After World War II, this group would form the core of political parties like the UDV-RDA that pushed for independence, though often still tied to French economic interests, which is to say, their economic interests. All told, the relations of production were fairly straightforward. Peasants were forced into commodity production, cotton, and taxed into the money economy. Proletarians were created through coercion, but not allowed to stabilize into a domestic industrial working class because they were shipped off to other colonies. Compradors and chiefs were maintained as intermediaries, dependent on French capital rather than autonomous, and this produced a dependent economy. Burkina Faso could not industrialize or accumulate capital. Instead, it was locked into supplying cheap labor to more, quote, profitable colonies. But let's get back very briefly to those political parties I mentioned. After World War II, France introduced reforms, such as the abolition of forced labor in 1946, very woke of them to do that, and as well as limited political representation. The small comprador bourgeoisie of clerks, teachers, traders, and veterans took this opportunity and ran with it. Educated through mission schools, they spoke French, they knew how the political system worked, and they gained positions in the administration. They began to organize politically through the Voltaic Democratic Union, linked to broader African liberation networks. Chiefs and the Mossi monarchy initially collaborated with the French, but also fought to reconstitute Upper Volta to protect Mossi migrants from exploitation in the Ivory Coast, as I mentioned earlier. The contradiction here was clear. Compradors sought reform and autonomy, peasants wanted relief from taxes and labor, and chiefs sought to preserve power, all with different motives, but a shared enemy in French overexploitation. And with the stage set for a certain someone, I will hand it over to Hugo.
Thank you very much, even though that kind of sounded like I started shit over there.
Typical Hugo.
But I was not yet born, or if you believe in, I don't know, multiple lives, who the fuck knows? I'm narcissistic enough to believe that I was an important person in a previous life because I am a very important person now, for I am a part of the Deprogram.
Close enough. Welcome back, Thomas Sankara.
Whoa! Jokes aside, this topic is very serious, so let's jump forward a decade or two when Upper Volta, what Burkina Faso was called at the time, just as a reminder to the listeners, gained independence from France in 1960. It inherited the very colonial economy structured de facto for underdevelopment that JT just talked about. The political setup at independence reflected this economic dependency. Maurice Yameogo, the country's first president, consolidated a one-party state under what they called the Volcanic Democratic Union. His government was staffed by members of the urban petit bourgeois, people like clerks, teachers, bureaucrats, and military officers educated under French colonial rule. This entire class of people relied heavily on French aid, leading to French personnel holding senior administrative posts, allowing French capital and even French currency systems to directly tie the new republic to Paris. In short, what existed before independence simply continued. The state was manned by a comprador elite, now independent only on paper. In non-nerd terms, domestic traders, so-called intermediaries between France proper and the Voltaic peasantry, now LARPed sovereignty. This being said, though, I have to mention that while we do love our heavy wording here on the show, as the proletarian Ubermenschen that we are, this sort of class dichotomy developing in Burkina was, to a very large extent, unavoidable under the material conditions left to Burkina as a former colony. The economic base of post-colonial Upper Volta left little room for a national bourgeoisie rooted in domestic industry. They were bourgeois not by virtue of owning factories, but through their access to the state apparatus and their role as intermediaries in French capitalist extraction of our favorite word, surplus. Imagine if your middle manager was the administration of a whole country, with your company's board of trustees being the French government, a professional managerial class government, so to say. The new leader, Yameogo, quickly alienated the masses through austerity, wage cuts, removal of subsidies, and lavish personal spending. By 1965, strikes by teachers and civil servants spread, joined by unions representing urban workers. These protests represented the growing discontent of the urban petit bourgeois, whose demands were not simply economic but also political: greater participation, less corruption, and a voice in decision-making. The breaking point, though, came in January of '66, when massive demonstrations and strikes paralyzed the entire country. The army, led by a Lieutenant Colonel Lamizana, intervened, ousting Yameogo. The 1966 coup was not a revolutionary rupture, but a bourgeois military recomposition. The comprador class sought to preserve its privilege by replacing pretty much what they saw as a now discredited leader. Off with the head while the same body remained. Lamizana suspended the constitution, dissolved parliament, and ruled with the backing of both the army and France. The coup's class meaning was clear. It secured the comprador order against both popular uprisings and independent proletarian politics. For somebody who wants to maybe make an interesting parallel on the conversation of, capitalism utilizing violent means in order to preserve itself, is something that we very commonly define as fascism. Happened to a certain extent here, but under an environment and a climate that was even more unhinged. It was not even properly established capitalists using violence in order to preserve the current status quo. It was the servants of foreign capitalists that used violence to preserve the servant status quo. So fascism de facto is cuckolded, but this one is even unfortunately in post-colonial environments even more of a pathetic fascistic move. Jumping forward to the 70s, urban unions started organizing their power in hopes of participating as real political actors, with the teachers' unions being particularly actually militant. They embodied the contradictions of colonial education. They were trained to administer a modern state, but then they were trapped in a dependent economy that offered very few rewards. Their demands obviously focused on wages, job security, and the dignity of intellectual labor, but they also became vehicles for broader critiques of neocolonialism. To make it as simple as possible, the French send a particular way of educating the locals that is, for example, used also in France, where they're talking about fraternité, liberté, or whatever the fuck, and you're a teacher that really gets into this, let's call it material, and then you're teaching it to your kids, and you're like, what the fuck am I talking about? You actually, unironically, gain some sort of spontaneous, to an extent, maybe not class consciousness, but understanding of where your country is still in relation to the quote-unquote old colonial rulers, which then you realize are not that old of a colonial ruler. Students, likewise, became a radical force. Student unions across all of West Africa had historically been incubators of anti-colonial thought, and in Upper Volta they began articulating demands for democratic freedoms, anti-corruption measures, and alignment with liberation movements all across the continent. Their class base was, as to be expected, children of clerks, civil servants, and minor landowners. All of this obviously gave them the ideological tools to critique the system, but also, unfortunately, limited their ties to peasantry. See how everything, to an extent, is always comes back to class, with all due respect. To continue, workers' unions, in contrast, were numerically smaller. With little industry, the urban working class in Upper Volta was confined to railway workers, miners, construction crews, and, public sector employees. Their struggles centered on wages and conditions, but, they did not possess the numbers or weight to dominate politics as in more industrialized African states. Thus, the political dichotomy of the 1970s came from the urban petit bourgeois, teachers, students, and junior officers that we mentioned earlier, whose ideological radicalism outpaced their, what they started to feel, limited class power. In a way, they knew just how much they were missing out on because they understood the colonial oppressive dynamic. But that's not the peak of these fascinating and sometimes sad contradictions. No, those lie in Upper Volta's so-called externalized proletariat. By the 1970s, up to 2 million Burkinabe lived and worked in the Côte d'Ivoire, Ghana, and other neighboring states. These workers, employed in cocoa plantations and urban construction, represented the true proletarian class of Upper Volta, wage laborers exploited by both Ivorian and French capital. The money these people sent back home was very vital to Upper Volta's survival, yet their absence left the country without a domestic proletarian base capable of spearheading revolutionary politics. This is another example of how there can be, and we have had episodes discussing this, there can be a class-conscious criticism of migration, not one of xenophobia. We're like, oh, these people are different, why the fuck they're coming? But conversations about brain drain, or the conversations about the draining of an entire class of people from a particular country, which then totally removes any ability of the remaining class to ensure its own representation in political governance. Inside Upper Volta, the population remained overwhelmingly peasant, where they bore the brunt of droughts, IMF austerity, and corruption, but remained dispersed, tied to land, and difficult to mobilize on a national scale. This structural condition meant the fermentation of revolution had to come from the urban petit bourgeois, acting as a sort of surrogate proletariat, if you'll excuse my borderline vulgar definition. They pushed radical ideas in the absence of a large domestic working class. And this contradiction, my dear friends and listeners, a peasant majority at home, proletariat abroad, set the limits of said political mobilization. This is the stage that Thomas Sankara entered, had insanely complex matrix of contradictions. A young military officer trained in Madagascar, he absorbed Marxist, anti-imperialist, and pan-Africanist ideas. Within the army, he forged ties with radical junior officers, and outside it, he cultivated relations with students and unions. His ascent to power in the August of 1983 with a coup was the culmination of alliances between radicalized petit bourgeois strata and sections of the military disillusioned with comprador stagnation. Once in power, Sankara sought to transform the neo-colonial state into an instrument of popular emancipation. His government, the National Council of the Revolution, launched ambitious programs like economic self-reliance, where they refused IMF loans, invested in agriculture, and started campaigns for food self-sufficiency. Mass mobilization, where They did literacy drives, vaccination campaigns, tree planting, and women's emancipation. Anti-comprador discipline. Officials required to disclose wealth. Luxury was banned. Bureaucrats forced into modest lifestyles. And Pan-Africanism. The denunciation of debt slavery calls for African unity, true internationalism, and solidarity with other liberation movements. Before listeners start, scratching their heads and being like, that sounds like, classic reformism to me, you would genuinely be wrong. Sankara's government was not simply a set of reforms, but a revolutionary attempt to reconfigure class relations in a semi-colonial society. His land redistribution programs, for instance, directly attacked the authority of traditional chiefs whose control over land had been for long a mechanism of both feudal and colonial domination. By empowering peasants to cultivate land collectively and by promoting women's equal rights to land, Sankara sought to dismantle both patriarchal and neo-feudal structures. These measures threatened the comprador class and local intermediaries of French capital, since their control of surplus relied on precisely those pre-existing hierarchies. Sankara's insistence that he who feeds you controls you encapsulated this drive for sovereignty. Severing dependence on French imports and aid was not only economic policy, but a class project aimed at breaking comprador mediation. He was attempting to redraw class lines, not stabilize them as a reformist would. At the same time, Sankara's reliance on mass mobilization committees and revolutionary tribunals revealed both the strength and weakness of his rule. These grassroots institutions bypassed the comprador bureaucracy and offered ordinary people, peasants, workers, women, a direct role in governance. Yet they were also fragile. Created from above by a revolutionary petty bourgeois leadership rather than consolidated through proletarian class struggle. While they energized the masses, they lacked the durability of entrenched class power. The absence of an organized industrial proletariat meant Sankara had to substitute political will for material base, sustaining the revolution through charisma, discipline, and, voluntarist campaigns. This substitution, while momentarily effective and completely understandable because what the fuck else was he gonna do, could unfortunately not withstand the counteroffensive of entrenched comprador elites, imperialist isolation, and internal dissent within the military itself. To make it very simple, in order to understand the difficult contradictions set against his revolution, I want to literally list them out one more time just so that you guys can properly process the material. So let's go. Number one, the urban petit bourgeois, once radical, resisted when their privileges were cut. The revolution quite literally went too far for their privilege. Number two, the comprador bourgeoisie and traditional chiefs opposed land reform and taxation for obvious reasons. Number three, France and Côte d'Ivoire felt directly threatened by his independence, particularly his refusal of foreign aid and criticism of neocolonialism. We know what imperial and capitalist states do to revolutions. Number three was even more than the previous ones, completely unavoidable, right? And number four, finally, crucially, the absent proletariat meant Sankara could not anchor his revolution in a mass industrial working class, instead having to rely on mobilizing peasants whose local grievances were difficult to translate into stable national power. These tensions unfortunately culminated in October of '87 when Blaise Compaoré, I don't even want to properly pronounce his stupid fucking name, Sankara's former ally, led a coup backed by external powers. Sankara was assassinated, and with him, the revolutionary project collapsed. The comprador bourgeois, in alliance with French imperialism, did guess what? Reasserted control. In the end, Sankara's overthrow revealed the enduring contradictions of Burkina Faso, a nation of peasants with its proletariat abroad, trapped in the orbit of imperialist dependency, and struggling to forge a revolutionary path under the leadership of a radicalized petit bourgeois. But more on that from Comrade Hakim.
A beautiful view from both of you. MashaAllah. Generally, such a fruitful and educational episode. We're outdoing ourselves, I think. Let's hope I can keep that momentum, Lamar. All right.
I said it 1,000 times. There's, you have crushes like your partner, then you have friend crushes like your bros, and then you have intellectual crushes. And the two sitting next to me are the definition of exactly that. So whenever JT or Hakim give me that even slightest compliment of like, damn, dude, that was nice, or damn, that was fucking smart, I literally, like, I have a tiny penis inside of my brain that immediately ejaculates. And there you go. I ruined all the seriousness of the previously, I think, pretty well made analysis, and nobody will ever take me seriously. But I'm okay with living that.
Of the of the ejaculating intellectual boner.
My dad always liked to say, the worst thing for a man to do is to forget himself, because the second he forgets himself, God reminds him. Being like, if you take yourself too fucking seriously, somebody will push you down a few notches. That's why I try not to do it. Apologies for the little psychology therapy session that I just did there at the end. Please continue.
Do you want to know the supreme pathology of the Iraqi mindset? This reminded me of something.
Yes.
Very common amongst boomers, Iraqi boomers, but just the Arab parents, specific Iraqis. If anything bad happens, they're gonna be like, "Man, the kid." And he's like, "Who thought of me? Who like, I crossed someone's mind and the fucking vase broke. Which motherfucker thought of me right now?"
Oh, that's cute.
So, yeah.
Absolutely can relate.
Anyways, let's continue with this. All right, so Sankara was assassinated in a criminal fashion, of course, in 1987 by his former comrade Traore. He's the one who seized power afterwards, and he basically dismantled everything that Sankara built. Or Sankara was only a person. There was a political movement behind him, though it was, as the boys mentioned, not a coherent political movement in the form of, for example, the Chinese Communist Party, or the Vietnamese movements, or the Cuban movements, or whatever else, right? It was a very complex mishmash because of the level of underdevelopment of Burkina Faso, economically and even to a certain extent socially, when it came to the superimposed European systems of governance that followed after independence. But Traore, he seized power, and he destroyed the Sankaraist, let's say, anti-imperialist, radical, socialist even, policies that passed. One of the first things that he would do is he would establish this veneer of a quote-unquote democracy, where it would just be like, oh, 100%, 100%, 100%. Oh my God, he's amazing. He keeps winning 100%. So this regime that would go on for almost 30 years, nearly three full decades, where he would have a setup of state bureaucrats in multi-party, I guess, lines, you could say, divided amongst several political organizations, which would facilitate between support, patronage of certain sectors and repression of other sectors to kind of keep them in check. Very typical, post-independence, Western-backed African quote-unquote dictatorship. They're all dictatorships, even the democratic ones. The democracies of Europe are fucking dictatorships. The dictatorships of the bourgeoisie, dictatorships of the capital, that's what I mean. But his was much more overt. That's the point I'm trying to get to. He immediately brought Burkina Faso closer to France and other powers within the region. He would intervene, or he would mobilize the military of Burkina Faso to intervene in West African conflicts. Economically, the policies that were pulled back were all the ones which would nationalize important state sectors, try to move Burkina Faso up the commodity chain by developing local industrial or manufacturing sectors which would be able to process the incredibly rich natural wealth of Burkina Faso, be it gold or minerals or cotton or wherever else. So they're not just exporting raw material so that it can be refined and turned into something, bikhair, as we say in Arabic, something that has value outside of Burkina Faso, so it can be done inside Burkina Faso. All this was dismantled under the subsequent Compaore government. And this is a period of nearly 30 years, I need to remind you. Along with this, as I mentioned, a complete shift towards moving away from self-reliance and a shift towards structural adjustment programs, IMF programs, World Bank readjustment programs, privatization of state enterprises, social spending cuts, economy being open to foreign investment, which would usually mean that, hey, yeah, you get tax exempt if you decide to invest 2 million euros into our fucking mine or whatever, to the detriment of the local population. Government would look the other way as long as local state bureaucrats would get paid. During this period, of course, gold mining, which is one of the biggest exports, as we mentioned earlier, of Burkina Faso. The amount of think about, like, Niger has all this uranium, Burkina Faso has all this gold. Burkina Faso, like Mali, has a tremendous amount of gold. This gold manufacturing sector or mining sector, let's say, expanded tremendously in this new government. And as a result of this, the cotton industry, which was larger prior, was overtook. And the difference is that cotton was less dominated by foreign enterprise. In comparison, the gold sector was almost entirely dominated by foreign enterprise, as you may expect. Very small amounts of profit would end up remaining in Burkina Faso. Poverty progress, reductions in poverty, that was made under the Sankara government was very quickly reversed. In fact, it increased. Vast majority of the population continued to exist between subsistence farming, just for them and their families, and informal sector labor, either being herbal, either being peasant tenant farming, or in quote-unquote artisanal gold mining, which I'll get into in a second. It's not like going down to your local
mom and pop gold
market.
mines.
Yeah, exactly right. Let me just talk a little bit about Compaore a little bit more before we move into the political movements. In 2014, Compaore did a couple of things. One of which was he tried to amend the constitution so he could prolong his rule. That's number one, but that was not the big one. The second one was the reversal of very popular state subsidies, as well as not bans but restrictions on privatization of critical state sectors, right, of the economy. He reversed these. He lifted some of the state subsidies, and he allowed multinational, particularly French companies, to really penetrate into. This was like from 2002 until 2014. That was his grand push, and there were protests the entire time. And these protests were not disorganized movements. There were groups of students and teachers. These are usually the most radical because they're the most highly educated, sadly. So there's this petty bourgeois undercurrent to it. But there's also workers' movements and other forms of unions that did exist, along with the grievances of peasants within Burkina Faso. Regardless, these would continue, and these would grow into mass protests, which included civil society groups, unions, youth groups, and so on and so forth. And Compaore was forced to resign and then flee to the Ivory Coast in 2015, roughly, and it was also a difficult transition. There was shooting of protesters, all that kind of stuff. The person who came into power after him was a transitional figure named Michel Kafando, with a co-ruling with the military. There were elections held in 2015, and a guy named Kabore came to power, which was, I guess, hoped to bring back more Sankarist ideals, plus minus, because Sankara is a very huge, almost like saint figure in Burkina Faso at this point. And this is like hyper emphasized because vast majority of the Burkina population, or not vast majority, but a large majority, are Muslim. They're 65% or something. Thomas Sankara was not. He was of a Christian background. Ibrahim Traore is Muslim, for example. But regardless of these differences, and this is a country with many religious and ethnic differences, linguistic differences, the fact that one figure or several figures can rise to state prominence and create this national, I guess, aura, if you even want to call it that, is very significant and uniting.
Lots of aura maxing in Burkina.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it's the fucking beret, man. The beret and the motorcycles and the playing the guitar. He would have been such a cool guy.
Yeah.
Or he was a cool guy. We were born in the wrong era. What can I say? Anyways, Kabore came to power. His government sucked balls, basically. The security situation just continued to deteriorate. One of the things is there were insurgencies in the north. They're very frequently called jihadist ones. I don't like this. They're like, oh, it's Al Qaeda, it's ISIS, it's this, is that. The vast majority of the people who are affected by these movements have class underpinnings to this. We're going to come to it in a second. But for now, just know that there were these movements that were disrupting. And by the 2020s or so, hundreds of thousands to millions of people had been displaced. And large chunks of the government of the country had been under control, either at least like minimally under control by these insurgency groups. Throughout all this period, this incredible instability, gold mining surprisingly boomed. Oh my gosh, who would have thought? The share of gold that Canadian and Swiss companies were taking away was incredible, magnificent. Oh my gosh, who would have thunk?
Well, one would think that they would not take advantage of such a horrible situation to maximize profits, because the unstable situation has become even more unstable. They are governed by so the rule of civil liberties and the understanding, blah 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 blah. What's the word? Corporate social values. Yeah, baby.
Exactly right. Yes, please.
Corporate social values of my big thick wallet. Okay.
Yes, please. We're gonna have to get you in a meeting with people. That's our HR unit. We call it people. And it's not called a meeting. It's called a sit down. So you're gonna have a sit down with people. Where we're going to talk about how you have your ball sack out in our meetings and how it doesn't align with our company policy. By the way, it's June, so you should paint it the appropriate colors, okay? There's the rainbow pad, but on July 1st, you need to dip it in. I don't know what else. What is the next month in the States? Is July a state? Is there a holiday
I'm
in
sure.
July? There must be. I love how they gave February to African Americans the shortest fucking
terrible.
month. And by the way, every couple of years there's like even less fucking
July.
You guys are horrible.
celebrations.
There's a National Ice Cream Month and National Hot Dog Month.
Yeah. So you have to go and get the B and J
National
tattooed.
Grilling Month. Yeah.
Oh my gosh! I'm a subscriber of the National Grilling Month. Let me continue. During all this, an interesting development within the class relations of Burkina Faso has happened. We're talking cutting edge class transformation, right? We're talking about the past 10, 15 years. And that is the vast base of tenant and peasant farming that exists within Burkina Faso has been forced, because of the economic precarity and the instability of the social situation within Burkina Faso, they've been forced into, surprise, surprise, artisanal gold mining. They have been semi-proletarianized. Oh my gosh, the contradictions are sharpening. Woo! So because of this, you had people who previously had little plots of land. What's up?
The way you did it is so good. Yeah, please. Yeah.
They had little plots of land that they could work to grow their own food, and they could kind of like subsist. That's why it's called fucking subsistence farming. But now they're forced to dig in the dirt for gold while somebody holds a machete to their neck. Like it's horrible what's happening to these people. But that is the violence of proletarianization. That is what happened in Europe 300 and 200 and 100 years ago. In parts of Europe, I mean, the Balkans and Bulgaria and Romania and stuff, some of this stuff happened 80 years ago, 90 years ago, right? And in the rest of the imperial periphery, it's stuff that's an ongoing process. But that's something to note. And this is because of the underdevelopment of the economy. Anyways, popular frustration, completely destroyed by neoliberal, because of institutions destroyed by neoliberal structuring and foreign interference and whatnot, eventually erupted into these massive popular mobilizations, not only in Burkina Faso, but in Niger, in Mali, and across West Africa. And that was between 2017 to the early 2020s, which led into the popular coups that we know, the quote-unquote coup belt, which is a derogatory term for what happened. These are popular movements that are happening there, contrary to all the quote-unquote respectable democracies supported by Western governments, which had zero legitimacy, right? Compaoré or even the subsequent, like, quote-unquote elections had like 1 million people voting. Burkina Faso has a population of 23 million. And they had 1 million people voting, and they're basing like a political legitimacy off of these places where, like, to give you just a bit of an overview, in Burkina Faso, for the vast majority of the population, you have to go minimum of 20 kilometers to get to a durable road. That means a road that you can actually carry cars and trucks on, that aren't off-roading vehicles, right? In this circumstance, where the fuck are you doing polling? And also in such a rural country, it's not highly urbanized as like fucking Hong Kong or something, where everybody can go down to the local school and vote. right? It's a level of stupidity, but that's kind of the mythology of quote unquote democratic practice, where as long as there's on paper somebody pretends to count votes, then
Yeah.
and it gets the seal of approval from the EU and the US, then it's okay. But moving on, there were another set of protests that kind of coalesced with this, which was against the CFA franc. This was in Senegal in 2017, which quickly spread across the Sahel. So this includes Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. The CFA franc is a local currency used in these countries for paying out wages and just regular life as a currency used. But it is, guess what, defined, used, printed, and completely controlled by the Central Bank of France.
Yeah.
Paris is the one that controls this shit in 2025.
Yeah.
Like in 1962, okay, fine. It's still fucked up, but I get it, right? But it's been like a century almost after independence, and this still kind of happens. That's why political independence is not enough. You always need economic independence, and that's what these coups are trying to do. Anyways, this currency that's entirely controlled by the French treasury is the tool of economic domination. It's a neo-colonial symbol. And these protests that started in Senegal spread to Mali and then eventually also into Burkina Faso. At this point, and this is where we're getting to 2021, France decided to start hitting airstrikes. They followed the American package of hitting wedding parties across West Africa, claiming these were jihadi terrorists, this and that. They had weapons of mass destruction, but what they were doing was just killing civilians, essentially. The vast majority of these killed civilians. Nobody, was brought to justice for this, but they just fueled massive demonstrations, eventually culminating in the withdrawal of French troops, international troops in certain areas of West Africa. In Burkina Faso, these mass mobilizations would eventually lead Kabore's government to collapse, essentially, which would then eventually lead into a series of coups that result in Traore's government coming to power. Before this, let me just give you a very quick overview of the quote-unquote multi-party system that is constitutionally enshrined in Burkina Faso. Oh my gosh. The legitimacy pouring out of my pores regarding this.
Legitimize.
You should see the nonsense that's written. When you read the enemy's work, there is a 2023 investment climate statement on Burkina Faso by the U.S. Department of State. I don't want you to read it because you're going to want to kill yourself. It's also like 90 pages. But basically, they're like, the transitional government is, corrupting the vibrant multi-party system. It's garbage, but they're still like, but there's opportunities in gold. Don't you worry. Go over here and get these opportunities in gold. And they have these state. I love it. They have these entire segments on like how they can strengthen protection of property rights and industrial policy. And then they have a state-owned enterprises segment, which is like two sentences. They have fucking no information on this. But another one that is more important that people should possibly read is one called, let me bring this up here for you boys. Creating Markets in Burkina Faso, Growing Burkina Faso's Private Sector and Harnessing it to Bolster Economic Resilience by the World Bank Group. Yeah, no, the face JT is making is my face. They have an executive summary here, which is basically an entire circle jerk about how good the private sector is. We need to strengthen the private sector. It's very good that there's artisanal gold mining and that infants are losing their hands.
Oh.
They talk about, hold on. In this executive summary, in the actual report, they talk about how because of how the boom in artisanal gold mining, different insurgent groups have, and also local state bureaucrats have taken over gold mining areas within the country and created their own microstates with their own laws, which include shit like, if you drink water for more than 20 seconds, we'll cut your hand off. You need to get beaten back in the mines. It's generally like this. There's 16-hour work days. There's no workers' rights or anything. And people are paid like pennies on the dollar, even less. So on and so forth. And also, many tons of gold go unaccounted for in these mines. So there's a level of export that is quote-unquote official, that goes to the state government, that's accounted, blah, blah, all that. And then there's several tons, we're talking tons of gold is a very significant amount of money. We're talking billions of dollars here. Several tons of gold that are smuggled out, and then magically they end up in a Swiss fucking bank somewhere with a Swiss stamp. How did this Burkinabe gold get there? Right? Or into Canadian coffers, the typical bullshit. I'm not gonna subject you to the garbage of this World Bank report, but the entire gist of it is trying to use macroeconomic, I guess, not like they want to force policies that would incentivize quote unquote private industry, and the vast majority of them are like, oh, give tax breaks to Western organizations or multinationals. That's a very mask off stuff, but
It's going
covered
to grow the economy. More
and-
businesses are going to come there and
Yeah,
cut off more
exactly
hands of
right.
toddlers. Oh,
Exactly
wait,
right.
did I say that out loud? I only wanted to think it. Oh,
Yes,
my name
please.
is Klaus or something.
I am. What's it called? Old
Ich bin
person.
ein kleiner...
Yes, Kleiner von Bloodmouth. Send all cut off 3-year-old hands to me. I'll use them in my personal collection. Don't ask what I use them for. I was also at the island. I have pictures of Epstein very pridefully displayed on my mahogany table. Anyways, I'm not gonna.
Mahogany getting strays.
Exactly right. Anyways, what I was trying to tell you guys about was the multi-party system. There's a bunch of stupid parties here. They're all garbage. There's stupid names are very common to African political parties. Sadly, ones like People's Movement for Progress, which was Kabore's party, and it was mostly like centrist, quote unquote. It was a bureaucratic, like state bureaucrat party essentially, and this was one sector of them, usually along industry, and then there was ones more along agriculture, and that was the Congress for Democracy and Progress, which was the Traore party, and this was the people who would enforce the state policy essentially, who would be supported by this. And then you have like certain big tent parties, Union for Progress and Reform, which was more represented by business sector types, I guess, urban professionals, these types. And then finally you have the various Sankarist parties, Union for Rebirth, the Party for Democracy and Socialism, so on and so forth. Very split, but these are the actual ones with progressive youth organizations, leftist presidents, intellectuals, union activists, rural activists, but they're fairly fragmented, as leftist parties tend to be. Moving on from the class-based society, the ones that are quote unquote elite-controlled, state-dependent bourgeois, I already mentioned. Urban middle class are more in the Union for Progress and Reform, these like big tent parties which don't really fucking matter. And then the Sankarist ones are the ones that represent the vast majority of people, unsurprisingly. Where we spoke about unions earlier, labor unions are not the strongest thing in Burkina Faso. They're fairly small, the workforce, the urban like proletariat, but they have influenced political movements, of course, as they are supposed to, and they are mostly active along the urban centers, as you may expect. And they kind of coalesce with mass uprisings from more rural poor, and they coalesce towards these movements that end up overthrowing the previous governments. In January 2022, finally we're coming to Traore, there was Lieutenant Colonel Damiba that ousted the Kabore government, in specifically Kabore, in a coup. And this is because of the insecurity issues that are happening. And he himself, Damiba, was then kind of like swept away in the movement as younger officers would come into power. And that was specifically led by Ibrahim Traore. He has in his government has directed a Pan-African nationalist, Sankarist perspective, quasi-socialist. We know that several of the ministers are open Marxists, as well as Traore himself has used very clear Marxist language, if I can say that much. But I don't want to be like conspiratorial and be like he's hiding his power level. Some of this this linguistic phraseology is very common in anti-imperialist circles, but it is interesting that he has such a clear, like it's almost like Sankara speaking. Mm-hmm. It really is like this, and very great. He's fantastic in his speeches, which is why he's one of the most, if not the most popular figure in Africa. Though we have asterisks, blah blah, critical support bill, and all that stuff. Anyways, one of the things that the government quickly did was cut ties, specifically defense ties with France. It expelled French troops, and it realigned towards China, towards Russia, non-Western partners. Otherwise, Turkey has had some involvement as well. And of course, it created the alliance of Sahel states along with Niger and Mali to challenge the Western-backed ECOWAS bloc that exists within Africa.
They didn't think that through. They created the alliance of Sahel states.
Exactly right.
Fellas, rebrand.
Yeah. I believe I believe the acronym is French, so I think it's AES. The what's it
EA
called?
Sports, yes.
Exactly.
Even
Right.
worse
It's in the
than
game.
ass.
Exactly right. The big issue that exists with the insurgencies in Burkina Faso and across the Sahel in general isn't because there's some kind of like drive for radicalization there. It's usually and most often because there are youth in these areas that have basically no out. There's nothing that they have no jobs, they have no education, they can't get jobs, they can't get education. They have very dire economic circumstances, and because of this, and because of economic mismanagement of previous governments, particularly within these areas, and particularly against certain ethnic groups or tribes or what have you, they are pushed out of their regular forms of life. Like the Fulani tribe is used to nomadic herding, but they've been forced out of that kind of lifestyle. So now they're kind of existing in this like gray area where they can't be urban proletariat. They can't be farmers because they're in the Sahel, and parts of the Sahel are very arid and difficult to grow things in, and they can't go back to their traditional herding mechanism. So what alternatives do they have left? There's no state in these areas even to help them, and then eventually radicalizing forces can take control of that, including, by the way, the vast majority of these insurgencies being supported at least tacitly by Western interests because it allows them to maintain control over these lucrative mines and whatnot, natural resources. But that's just kind of like the nuance there. Normally and historically, Burkina Faso has relied on France to respond against these insurgent movements, but Burkina Faso has made a very clear like line in the sand against this, and I'll mention why. The reason is because for a very long time, France has kind of controlled the monetary situation in Burkina Faso through their military and through the franc zone. So it was kind of a dual strategy. I'll mention why. When they were getting independence, the French government basically drew up kind of a contract, let's say, with these post-independence governments, and they asked them for a couple of things that they just kind of forced their hands on. And one of which is number one, colonial debt regimes that they were absolutely required to quote unquote reimburse France for any sort of infrastructure that existed during the colonial era. So if they built a school or built a road, even through forced labor, for example, that was unpaid, they had to pay the French government for it. They would maintain resource control, for example, that they would have the first refusal right over certain mines or certain natural resources. So before they can go to China, for example, or I don't know where else, to South Africa to sell a particular ore, they have to go to France first and offer it to them first. And this is specifically for Niger and uranium. So they get preferential access to key sectors of economies. Tax exemptions was another one, which is basically called the principle of non-double taxation, which basically means French businesses that operated within West Africa would pay taxes only in France, and they were not they were exempt from obligations locally. Mm-hmm. So they didn't have to pay duties, they didn't have to pay sales tax, value-added taxes, fuel taxes. They didn't have to pay shit, right? As long as they're paying in France, because then it's as if you're still a colonial outpost. And of course, monetary dependency through the CFA franc, which is regulated by the French Treasury. There's another one that is really fucked up, and that's the military entrenchment. France had or maintained military bases all along West Africa, and it was granted free use of military installations, meaning any local military installation built by these governments, the French government could use. Not only this, this meant unrestricted movements on land, air, water. It meant free access to any transportation and communication infrastructure that they had, and it also meant the right to install any aerial or maritime signaling and transmission systems, basically at will. They get to control them militarily as much as they want. And France, of course, is a highly more developed military than the militaries of these governments, so they can kind of use this to force political change in a way. They can force coups. That's one of the point I'm trying to get at. They can force political change through violence. There was also an annex to this in 1961, where the French military's role as enforcer of French capital interests was, I guess, codified. It was specifically for two things. Number one, strategic raw materials. This means that the French military, had the right to go and occupy an area that had, for example, I don't know, uranium. specifically because a French company got first dibs on it, and they want control of it. And let's say there was a disagreement between Niger's government or Burkina Faso's government and France, they can send the French the French military to take over that area and forcefully extract whatever they want. Right, a military occupation essentially.
Yeah, making sure that if shit goes south, they protect their assets. Yeah.
Yeah, and this covered liquid or gaseous hydrocarbons, so basically oil and gas, and it also covered uranium, thorium, lithium, and beryllium, as well as ores and compounds of the previous mentioned, I guess, minerals. And the specific article states the French Republic shall regularly inform the Republic of the Ivory Coast, of Dahomey, which I believe now is Benin, Niger, of the policy it intends to follow concerning strategic raw materials and products, taking into account the general needs of defense, the evolution of resources, and the situation of the world market. And it said that also that these African nations had to ensure that France was kept informed of programs and projects concerning the export outside the territory of said governments. Basically, you have to ask France for permission to export gold or uranium or whatever, which is also fucked up. And there's many more of this, right? That the French armed forces can, at their own discretion, seize storages of strategic raw materials if they decide that it's beneficial to them, or they can prohibit the export to other countries if they politically disagree with it as well. You're not an independent sovereign country. That's the point. Of course, these are neo-colonial policies. Unsurprisingly, Burkina Faso, this was very unpopular, and this caused the French government to lose any support, which they have very little of. And French involvement in the country is seen very negatively, and there's anti-French demonstrations very regularly, which is a beautiful thing to see. If there's no anti-French demonstration, that means that I have died. Right? But yeah, moving on to the economics, we're kind of wrapping up here. Traore's government, it's still very early years, by the way, so it's not so much that's happened, but I'll try to give it a little bit of an overview. It began to first take greater control over mining within Burkina Faso, and this especially includes making a state-owned mining company, which didn't exist for the past couple of decades, and required foreign firms to give 15% stake in their local operations to the state-owned mining company, as well as to transfer any skills to Burkinabe people. So that doesn't mean French employed people would come, like just French people essentially, would go and work in French workplaces, but they just happen to be in Burkina Faso, earning EU French wages, and they leave and they take all the wealth with them. They have to train Burkinabe people to do what they're doing if they exist there. Not only this, but this applied to across the board, even to Russian mining conglomerate Norgold, which have received a license recently of this year. A lot of bullshit Western reporting tries to make it like, oh, Russia's colonizing or China's colonizing this shit. Burkina Faso, but no, they're applying the same rules that apply for the West. They're applying for the East as well. So this is truly a sovereign movement comparative to what came before. Not only this, but the government is also building gold refineries, establishing national gold reserves that have never existed before in the nation's history, despite it being incredibly wealthy in gold. That's like Iraq not having oil reserves, despite being one of the that's fucking crazy. That's like the United States not having burger reserves. That's like, to explain to the American mind, that's like the United States not having a reserve of football fields to measure things with, right? This is unheard of.
Great allegory.
But yeah, gold is still the largest, 89-90% of exports, and the vast majority of value prior to the current government was lost through smuggling, through illicit exports, through the foreign corporate domination of Burkina Faso's gold sector, and this resulted in basically a loss of. It's very difficult to measure the value transfers, but it's something to the tune of several $1 billion a year for such a small country and for a population of 20-something million, of the vast majority of which don't work within the gold sector. That's a tremendous amount of wealth that's lost each year by this very, very poor country. Not only this, but 2023 onwards, new reforms were introduced to suspend export permits for artisanal or semi-quote-unquote mechanized mining, meaning this thing that has exploded, destroying the lives of rural Burkina people, and instead has been driving the creation of a domestic refining base, I guess, so that they can process gold locally, they can expand state-owned companies, they can help with the streamlining of accounting for all this kind of stuff, basically making it a proper industry instead of just something that can be exploited for cheap. And by 2024, these firms that have been started up by this new government have produced more than 8 tons of gold. There's in this first quarter of 2025, over 11 tons of gold were produced. These are significant amounts of wealth that they are finally being accounted for in the government for the government and for the Burkina people. There's been a lot of bourgeois cope about this, and I'm going to read you a small snippet of a Financial Times article, which is titled "The Terrifying Crackdown on Mining Companies in Africa's Coup Belt."
Oh, no,
this
not the
one-
mining companies.
Yeah, this is from January 2025, so this is very recent. And it says military regimes in the Sahel have turned to tactics including arrests to assert control over critical mining supplies. All right, who do the mining
Critical
supplies
for who?
belong to? Yeah, exactly. Critical for who, and who do they belong to exactly? Now listen. International mining companies are at the mercy of terrifying tactics from military regimes in Africa. So this is the first
The
sentence.
owners of the mines. Yeah.
Yeah. Listen. Whose leaders are using legal disputes. Oh no, nationalization. Oh no, to blah blah for greater control over crucial minerals such as gold and uranium. And it mentions Mali, how they suspended some private conglomerates have suspended what's it called? Suspended operations following gold, the nationalization of gold in these mines. I want to highlight one specific phrase. Barrick Gold temporarily suspended operations in Mali after the government started seizing gold mines from its mine. By the way, it says weeks after the country issued an arrest warrant for Chief Executive Mark Bristow. What they don't mention is that Mark Bristow was wanted for grave corruption in Mali, and that's why he needs to be arrested. This is nowhere mentioned in it. It's
Unrelated.
nowhere mentioned in the fucking thing. Of course, they are. There's also a bunch of other stuff. Niger has stripped mining rights to one of the world's largest uranium reserves from French state-owned nuclear producer Orano. A bunch of Australians were kicked out as well, so on and so forth. And they bring in the people, the representatives of these companies to comment here. They don't bring the government for comment to say what's up. And look at one of these ghouls, bourgeois ghouls, that's trying to make this seem like it's a bad thing. They have been rewriting mining laws, demanding higher tax payments and larger ownership stakes in the industry, but have also resorted to restricting operations, issuing arrest warrants, and detaining employees. Yeah, because you're not following the law in these countries. That's why it's happening. It's terrifying dealing with the regime in Mali. Hold on, there's one quote. Yeah, Niger's government has said it's returning Orano's mines to the public domain of the state. This is supposed to be like a scare quotes. And then Ibrahim Traore, Burkina Faso's junta leader, said in October that we know how to mine our gold, and I don't understand why we're going to let multinationals come and mine it for us, essentially, which is funny enough. And I love the because of course the Financial Times, the pressure tactics have become a major problem for the global mining industry at a time when companies around the world are trying to secure long-term uranium supplies and boost production of gold, whose prices have risen to record highs. Of course, yeah, they're trying to capitalize on this. And there's one final thing that I want to mention here, which was absolutely delicious. One of the companies that has been wronged by these horrible, these independent blacks and stuff. That's basically the only thing missing from the ideology of this article. Said it intends to defend its rights with the competent authorities, and that only a desire shared by all stakeholders to reestablish a stable and sustainable mode of operation will allow activities to resume serenely.
Serene for whom?
Yeah, exactly
Sustainable
right.
for whom?
Yeah. That's ridiculous. It's
Who would think about the international mining conglomerates?
Yeah,
We
the
Oh,
poor
yes, of
small
course.
beans.
Yeah, exactly right. And by the way, of course, as you may expect, this was in January of 2025. In April 2025, there was a coup attempt in Burkina Faso. That was a major coup attempt.
Totally
that was foiled.
unrelated.
Yeah, exactly right.
Sent manufacturing before a coup? What the hell?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it was a military attempt to overthrow the government of Ibrahim Traore, and it was launched from the Ivory Coast, which is known, sadly, to be a government that is very Western aligned with this. It has always kind of been the launch point for coups, French and American-based coups. around West and Central Africa. The attempt was to basically attack the presidential palace, assassinate essentially the bureaucrats in place, and hopefully that the Traore would have been there so they could assassinate him. Likewise, then afterwards do the same thing, bring it back closer to French domination and whatnot. But it was completely foiled, and they arrested all the people and whatnot. And they found all the evidence that it was related to France, like goes back to France with support of the United States. And immediately the French government was like, "Oh, these blacks are imagining things. Why would we?" Right? As of course, as they are known to do. I'm gonna finish off here. The class relations that underline all of this have not changed too much, right? There's these resource exports and dependence on it, which continues to shape class relations to production in general. The rural peasantry is the majority. There's subsistence farming and growing of food, their own food, and then cash crops like cotton. There are these people who are part of the rural peasantry that are pushed into this semi-proletarian state where they're in urban informal economies or mining, this artisanal gold mining, which is kind of creating the base of major protest movements. They are the ones who are like proletarianizing Burkina Faso. And then you have the very small proletariat, which is mostly in like official mining or public employment and services and whatnot. And then you have these state officials and army bureaucrats and whatnot that are on top, with business actors related to foreign capital. It's kind of like a very fluid situation because the class structure has not yet settled. Right, all these motions are still continuous. Not the United States, which has a very set, or a European country, or in many of the East Asian countries. As a result of this, the prospect or the growth of these semi-proletarian proletarian elements will increase their political agency as well as their militancy, and as a result of that, this will create a problem for the current government because they will need to transform this resource nationalism that Burkina Faso has into a larger project, political, social, and economic project. It's good to call on Sankara's legacy. It's good to industrialize, create a manufacturing base. It's good to have state-owned production. It's good to have agricultural reform. It's good to create these alliances across African nations. But the only way out of this pit is to industrialize and raise yourself up from the low level of or low rung of commodity chain where they sit, so that they could not only diversify away from just gold and cotton, which is their largest development, but also into manufactured goods that they make domestically, so that they can be truly economically independent, and that will create the base for a more full-bodied political independence. And this is just kind of a step in the multipolarity shift that we're seeing. This does not mean that Burkina Faso is a socialist nation. It is one that has socialist prospects. Now, these socialist prospects would be driven by the movements created and developed by these semi-proletarian elements that exist within Burkina Faso. So far, we have a progressive anti-imperialist government which rejects neo-colonial domination and has put in good policies. This is a good step, but a military junta with state does stuff does not socialism make, if I'm doing the stupid English joke correctly. The involvement of all these various grassroots organizations and peasant associations and whatnot will create a more stable political system that will allow the government to become more truly representative of the vast majority of the Burkinabe people. This can only be achieved, again, outside of this commodity dependency that they have, outside of dependency of imports, outside of the low level of development of industry, and eventually the conclusion, hopefully, is that the dream that Sankara had of a truly independent political, social, and economic independence for Burkina Faso and the rest of Africa can be achieved through this stepping stone of multipolarity. I'll finish off with one final fairly good reading. It was published recently on the 12th of August, so just a couple of days ago, and it's on the Tricontinental Institute, which I highly recommend everybody follow. They're fantastic. They have a article titled "The Sahel Seeks Sovereignty," and it is very, very thorough and beautiful. Give it a read if you're more interested. That is it for today. It is a much longer episode, but we just came back, baby, so we have to come back with a force. We would not be able to do any of this without your lovely support. Generally, we can't even record without knowing that we have cute little piggies that wait for us at the trough and will gladly sop all the beautiful goo that we excrete out of our various orifices. Sorry
Only
for
the
the-
mouse.
He's back, folks.
Yeah.
He's back.
Please do support us on Patreon. You get fantastic perks. You get bonus episodes. You got exclusive episodes. The other day we were trying to, because the guys were sick sadly, so they had to, and I couldn't fill in. So we had to release one of our bonus episodes, I believe, make it wide release, and we have like dozens of them. I did not know we had
got
that
some
many.
bangers, too,
Yeah.
yeah.
Like we have, you're good for like a good year. A year's worth of extra
Premium
content.
slop.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So that's one. You get access to the Discord server, the best Discord server you're ever going to be on. If you're a particular tier, you get to join us at the Habibi chats, which we do once monthly, where you get to analyze our hog and we analyze yours, along with just fun discussions and whatnot. Amongst many other lovely perks, you get merch discounts. You get whatever. All right, you get the Hakim healthcare plan. All right, there's a lot of good stuff. Check it out. That is it from me. This has been the Deprogram. I'm Hakim.
I'm JT.
And I'm your Gopnik.
Let me at them toes, JT. Let me mind them. Just mind them toes.